My name is Marcella, and at 28 years old, I never imagined a single voicemail could shatter everything I believed about my family. It was past midnight when I finally checked my phone after a grueling 12-hour shift at Indianapolis General Hospital. The screen lit up with something that made my blood run cold. One voicemail from my mother with just 4 words: "Don't come back home." Below it, 46 missed calls from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Before I share what happened next, please let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, subscribe and like this video. Growing up in suburban Indianapolis, I thought we had the perfect American family. My mother, Catherine, was a successful real estate agent who always wore pearls and hosted dinner parties that made the neighbors envious. My father, Thomas, worked as an accountant for a firm downtown, the kind of man who read the newspaper every morning and never raised his voice. I was the eldest of 3 children, the responsible one, who always helped with homework and chores. My brother Jason, now 30, was the golden child from day one. He excelled at everything he touched. Football captain in high school, summa cum laude from Indiana University, and now an investment banker in Chicago pulling in 6 figures. Mom kept every trophy, every certificate, every newspaper clipping about his achievements in a special display case in the living room. When he visited, she would cook his favorite pot roast and apple pie from scratch. My sister Emma, 25, was the baby everyone adored. She had this way of tilting her head and smiling that made people want to give her everything. She married Richard when she was 22, a man 15 years older who owned several car dealerships across the state. Mom practically planned their entire wedding, a $70,000 affair at the country club, with 300 guests and orchids flown in from Thailand. Then there was me, the middle child who became a nurse despite mother's insistence that I should pursue something more prestigious. She never said it outright, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes when I showed her my acceptance letter to nursing school. While Jason's achievements decorated our home, my nursing degree hung in the hallway bathroom. While Emma's wedding photos covered an entire wall, my graduation picture sat in a frame behind others on the mantel. Our Sunday dinners were legendary in the neighborhood. Every week without fail, we gathered around Mother's dining table with the good china and cloth napkins. The routine never changed. Dad would carve the meat while Mother critiqued my appearance in subtle ways. "Your hair looks different, Marcella. Have you gained weight that scrub's color doesn't suit you?" Meanwhile, Jason would talk about his latest deals, and Emma would show off whatever jewelry Richard had bought her that week. 3 weeks before that voicemail, I brought Ben to Sunday dinner. He was a fellow nurse I'd been dating for 6 months, a kind man with gentle hands and a warm laugh. The problem was he was divorced with an 8-year-old daughter named Sophie. Mother's smile when I introduced him was so tight I thought her face might crack. Throughout dinner, she asked pointed questions about his failed marriage, his financial situation, his custody arrangement. Ben handled it with grace, but I saw the judgment in her eyes. After he left, Mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Marcella, you can do so much better than a divorced man with baggage. Think about your future. Think about what people will say." But I was 28 years old, and for once, I didn't want to think about what people would say. I wanted to think about how Ben made me laugh after difficult shifts, how he understood the weight of watching people suffer and heal, how his daughter had started calling me Miss Marcy and drawing pictures for me. The thing about growing up as the different one is that you learn to accept crumbs of affection as if they're a feast. I accepted forgotten birthdays because Mom was busy with Emma's wedding planning or Jason's promotion celebration. I accepted being cropped out of family photos because the lighting wasn't right on my side. I accepted sitting at the end of the table at family gatherings, always the one asked to take the picture instead of being in it. But there were moments when the mask would slip. Like when Mom introduced me to her friends as the one who works at the hospital, while Jason was the successful investment banker, and Emma was the one who married well. Or when she forgot to invite me to her birthday lunch, but remembered to call me when she needed someone to pick up the cake. Or when she told me that my choice to become a nurse was admirable but not ambitious. I told myself these were small things, that family was complicated, that love didn't always look the way you expected. I became an expert at making excuses for their behavior. Dad was just quiet by nature. Mom was stressed from work. Jason was busy with his important job. Emma was young and didn't mean to be thoughtless. I wrapped their indifference in pretty paper and called it Family Dynamics. The last normal Sunday dinner 3 weeks before everything changed, Mother spent the entire meal talking about Emma's new house renovation and Jason's upcoming promotion to senior partner. When Ben's name came up, she changed the subject to her latest real estate conquest. When I mentioned that I'd been promoted to charge nurse in the cardiac unit, she nodded absently and asked Emma about her kitchen backsplash options. I drove home that night with Ben's hand in mine, wondering why I kept going back, why I kept hoping for something that would never come. 3 days before the voicemail changed my life, everything started with a phone call at 5 in the morning. My grandmother Rose. My mother's mother had suffered a massive stroke and was being rushed to Indianapolis General, my hospital. I threw on yesterday's scrubs and drove through empty streets with my heart pounding against my ribs. Grandmother Rose was the only family member who ever seemed to truly see me. She sent cards on my birthday with handwritten notes called to ask about my difficult cases, and always had my favorite butterscotch candies when I visited. I reached the emergency department before anyone else using my badge to get immediate access. The attending physician, Dr. Morrison, was someone I'd worked with for years. He pulled me aside with that careful expression doctors wear when delivering difficult news. The stroke was extensive, affecting her speech and motor functions. The next 24 hours would be critical. I held her hand while they wheeled her to the ICU, her eyes finding mine with a desperation that made my chest tight. When my family arrived an hour later, the atmosphere shifted. Mother swept in wearing her real estate blazer, despite the early hour immediately demanding to speak with the head of neurology. Dad followed quietly, his face pale and drawn. Jason arrived from Chicago by noon, still in his expensive suit, making calls about flying in specialists from Mayo Clinic. Emma came with Richard crying prettily into a monogrammed handkerchief. But something was off about their grief. While I sat by grandmother's bedside holding her hand and talking to her about the garden she loved, I noticed Mother in the hallway making phone calls. Not to family members or friends, but to someone about documents and signatures. Jason kept checking his phone, texting rapidly with a frown. Emma whispered urgently with Mother near the nurse's station, both of them glancing toward grandmother's room when they thought I wasn't looking. Grandmother Rose drifted in and out of consciousness throughout the day. During one of her lucid moments when we were alone, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. Her words came out slurred, but urgent. "The truth, Marcella. Papers. Attic. You need to know." Before I could ask what she meant, her eyes rolled back and the monitors started alarming. The medical team rushed in, stabilizing her while my heart raced with questions. That evening, Mother insisted I go home to rest. "You've been here all day, Marcella. We'll take shifts. Go home, shower, sleep." But something in her tone, too eager, too insistent, made me suspicious. I pretended to leave, grabbing coffee in the cafeteria before circling back to the ICU. From the hallway, I heard Mother talking to Dr. Morrison about power of attorney and medical decisions. She was asking about grandmother's mental capacity, whether she could still make legal decisions, how to prove incompetence. I felt sick listening to her discuss my grandmother like a business transaction. When she left, I slipped back into the room. One of the night nurses, Patricia, had known grandmother for years through their church. She mentioned that Catherine had been there earlier with a man in a suit who wasn't family. They were asking questions about Rose's mental state over the past year, whether she'd shown signs of confusion or memory loss. I pulled grandmother's chart on the computer, using my access to review the full medical history. There were notes from earlier that day before I arrived documenting Mother's request for cognitive evaluation and competency assessment. She'd been trying to build a case that grandmother wasn't mentally sound. But for what purpose? Grandmother Rose lived modestly in the same house she'd shared with my late grandfather. She drove an old Toyota and clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. The next 36 hours blurred together. I refused to leave sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside grandmother's bed. Mother came and went with false concern, bringing coffee I didn't drink and sandwiches I didn't eat. Jason flew back to Chicago for an important meeting, promising to return. Emma posted sad selfies from the hospital chapel on social media, gathering sympathy, likes, and comments. On the second night, grandmother woke fully for what would be the last time. Her eyes were clear, focused, knowing. She beckoned me closer. her voice barely a whisper, but steady. "Marcella, my dear girl, the house, it's yours, everything, the papers in the attic, your mother, the truth about your mother." She's not. Before she could finish, she squeezed my hand 3 times, our old signal for, "I love you." And then her eyes closed. The monitors began their terrible flatline song at 3:17 in the morning. I called Mother with shaking hands. Her first question wasn't about grandmother's final moments or whether she suffered. It was whether grandmother had said anything before she died. When I mentioned she'd been confused, talking about the attic, Mother's relief was audible through the phone. "Don't worry about any of that, Marcella. We'll handle all the arrangements. You've done enough. Just go home and rest." But I couldn't rest. Grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "The truth about your mother. She's not." Not what? And why did Mother sound relieved when I mentioned the attic? The funeral was set for 3 days later, and Mother took control of everything. She chose the casket, the flowers, the music, even the dress grandmother would wear. When I offered to write the eulogy, she said Jason would handle it. When I asked about sitting with the family, she said space was limited in the first row. After the voicemail at midnight, after seeing those 46 missed calls, I didn't go to my apartment. Something pulled me toward grandmother's house instead. The key was still under the ceramic frog, where she'd always kept it. The house smelled like her, a mixture of lavender potpourri and the sugar cookies she always had in the jar by the stove. But in the darkness, with only moonlight streaming through the windows, it felt different, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, using my phone's flashlight to navigate through decades of accumulated memories. Christmas decorations, old furniture boxes labeled with years gone by. But in the far corner behind a dusty dresser, I found what grandmother wanted me to find: a metal filing box with a combination lock. The combination was my birth date, something that would have made me smile if my hands weren't shaking so badly. Inside the first document stopped my heart: an adoption certificate dated 28 years ago, 3 months after my birth. But it wasn't standard adoption papers. Only my father's signature appeared as the adoptive parent. Catherine's name was listed as step-parent. My biological mother's name was Sarah Williams Thompson. She died on my birthday. I sat on the dusty attic floor surrounded by papers that rewrote my entire history. There were photographs of a woman who looked exactly like me. Same dark hair that wouldn't hold a curl. Same green eyes that turned gray when it rained. Same crooked smile that Mother always said I should fix. Sarah Williams Thompson. My actual mother had been my father's first wife. The marriage certificate was dated 5 years before I was born. The death certificate was dated the day of my birth. Complications from childbirth. It read in clinical terms that did nothing to convey the tragedy of a woman dying as she brought life into the world. There were love letters between my parents. My real parents, full of hope and plans for their future family. Dad wrote about the nursery he was painting yellow because they didn't know if I'd be a boy or girl. Sarah wrote about the name she'd chosen and how she already loved me more than she thought possible. Then came the second marriage certificate. Dad married Catherine just 6 months after Sarah died. 6 months. How could grief transform into love that quickly? But as I read more documents, the truth became clear. Catherine had been Sarah's friend, or at least that's what Sarah believed. There were photos of them together at birthday parties, baby showers, barbecues. Catherine standing beside Sarah at her wedding to my father, smiling in her bridesmaid dress. A letter in grandmother's handwriting dated a year ago explained everything. She'd known the truth all along, but kept quiet for my sake, she claimed. Catherine had been in love with Thomas from college. When he chose Sarah instead, Catherine stayed close, playing the supportive friend while waiting for her chance. When Sarah died, Catherine swooped in to comfort the grieving widower, offering to help with the baby, gradually making herself indispensable, until Thomas, overwhelmed with grief and the demands of single parenthood, married her. But Catherine could never love the baby who looked exactly like the woman who'd had everything she wanted first. She agreed to raise me, but there was always resentment. Grandmother watched it all, documented it all. There were photos Catherine didn't know were taken, showing her pushing my stroller with disgust on her face. Notes about birthdays. Catherine forgot school plays. She missed accomplishments she ignored. Grandmother had been building a case for 28 years. The will was dated just 3 months ago. Grandmother had left the house and everything in it to me specifically. Not to her daughter Catherine, not divided among grandchildren, but to Marcella Sarah Thompson, biological daughter of Sarah Williams Thompson, the woman who should have inherited my love if she'd lived. The amount shocked me. The house was paid off worth at least $400,000 in the current market. There were also investment accounts, bonds, and a life insurance policy. All told, it was close to $1 million. I found the letters grandmother had written, but never sent one for each year of my life. They all began the same way. Dear Marcella, this year I watched you grow despite the drought of love in your home. She described watching me excel at school while mother praised Jason's inferior grades. She noted every time I was excluded from family photos. Every cruel comment disguised as concern. Every moment Catherine's mask slipped to reveal her true feelings. The final box contained information about Sarah's family. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was in college, but she had a sister in Colorado, Margaret Williams Coleman, and a brother in Oregon, David Williams. There were addresses, phone numbers, photos of family gatherings I'd never known existed. People who shared my blood, my real mother's blood, who might have wanted to know me if they'd been given the chance. At the bottom of everything was a USB drive labeled security footage. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my phone. The videos were from 3 months ago, the day grandmother updated her will. The footage showed Catherine in grandmother's house while grandmother was at a doctor's appointment. She was going through papers in the study, photographing documents, searching for the will. Another video showed Catherine and Jason discussing how to get grandmother declared incompetent. Emma was there too, calculating how much her share would be worth. The final video was grandmother speaking directly to the camera. Marcella, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone and you found the truth. I'm sorry I kept it from you for so long. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was just a coward. Your mother was a beautiful soul who would have loved you completely. Catherine took that from you. Don't let her take anything else. The house is yours. The money is yours. Most importantly, the truth is yours. Use it as you see fit. I sat in that attic until dawn, surrounded by evidence of a lifetime of deception. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I didn't read. The 46 missed calls had become 52, then 60. Family members who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly needed to reach me urgently. I knew why now. Catherine had discovered the will, discovered she'd been cut out, discovered that the daughter she'd resented for 28 years had inherited everything. The sun was just breaking over the horizon when I arrived at my parents' house. The driveway looked like a family reunion. Jason's BMW with its Illinois plates, Emma's husband's Mercedes, 2 cars, I recognized as belonging to mother's sisters from Ohio. They were all here for the vulture's feast, circling what they thought was their inheritance. I could hear raised voices through the front door, mother's sharp tone cutting through the chaos. Jason's analytical voice trying to make sense of things. Emma's tears that always appeared when money was involved. I didn't knock. This had been my childhood home too, even if I'd only ever been a guest in it. The living room fell silent when I walked in. Mother stood in the center like a general commanding her troops. Her perfect composure cracked when she saw me replaced by something raw and ugly. There you are. How dare you manipulate a sick old woman? How dare you steal from this family? Jason stepped forward, his banker's mind already calculating. Marcella, we need to discuss this rationally. Grandmother wasn't in her right mind. You took advantage of her confusion. We'll contest the will. No court will uphold this clear case of elder abuse and undue influence. Emma's tears intensified on cue. How could you do this to us? We're family. That money belongs to all of us. Richard and I were counting on that inheritance for our new house. You can't just take everything. I looked around the room at these strangers who shared my father's house, but had never been my family. Aunts and uncles who only remembered my name when they needed something. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me since childhood, suddenly concerned about fairness and family loyalty. And in the corner, my father silent, as always, studying his hands instead of meeting my eyes. "I know about Sarah," I said quietly, and the room erupted. Catherine's face went white, then red, then something beyond color. Her carefully maintained composure shattered, like expensive china thrown against a wall. "That woman has been dead for 28 years. She has nothing to do with this. She was my mother," I said. "My real mother. The one you let die alone while you waited to take her place. The one whose husband you stole. The one whose child you pretended to love while resenting every breath I took." Jason tried to interject with his practiced lawyer voice, but I cut him off. "You all knew. Every single one of you knew I was Dad's daughter from his first marriage. You knew Catherine wasn't my mother. You knew why she treated me differently, and you said nothing. You participated in the lie." Emma stopped crying, her face shifting to something calculating. "So what Catherine raised you. She fed you, clothed. You put a roof over your head. You owe her everything." I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "She did the legal minimum required to avoid jail, nothing more. Every birthday you celebrated while mine was forgotten. Every achievement you posted about while mine was ignored. Every family photo I was excluded from, you all knew why. And you were fine with it." Catherine found her voice again, and it was venomous. "Your mother was nothing special, just another pretty face who trapped Thomas with a pregnancy. She was weak, couldn't even survive childbirth. I gave him what she couldn't, a real family, successful children who actually matter." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jason looked shocked by the admission. Emma's mouth hung open. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, some heading for the door, not wanting to witness this explosion. Dad finally stood up. "Catherine, that's enough." But she wasn't done. "I raised her child out of duty, nothing more. Do you know what it's like looking at her face every day, seeing Sarah's ghost walking through my house, sitting at my table calling me mom? I deserved that inheritance for 28 years of pretending that child meant something to me." I pulled out my phone and played the security footage of Catherine discussing with Jason how to have grandmother declared incompetent. Then the video of her searching the house. Finally, grandmother's last message. The room watched in stunned silence as their matriarch was exposed not as a grieving daughter, but as a calculating thief who'd been planning to steal from her own mother. Jason, ever the strategist, tried one more approach. "The will can still be contested. Grandmother was clearly experiencing some paranoia, keeping security cameras, making secret recordings. Any good lawyer could argue mental deterioration." I smiled and pulled out the final document. A cognitive evaluation from 3 months ago, the same day the will was signed. Dr. Morrison had examined grandmother at her request. She was found to be in excellent mental health, sharp as ever, with no signs of dementia or confusion. She'd known exactly what she was doing. Catherine lunged at me, then actually physically lunged her manicured nails, reaching for the papers. Dad had to hold her back while she screamed things that can never be taken back. 28 years of suppressed hatred poured out in a torrent of abuse that finally showed everyone exactly who she really was. I looked at my father, this weak man who'd chosen comfort over truth, ease over ethics. "You could have told me. Any time in 28 years, you could have told me the truth about my mother." He met my eyes for the first time in years. "Catherine said it would be better if you didn't know, less complicated." And I was so tired, Marcella. So tired and sad, and Catherine was there taking care of everything. "Taking care of everything except your daughter," I replied. I turned to leave, but Emma grabbed my arm. "You can't just take everything and leave. We're still family. That money should be shared." I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. "We were never family. Family doesn't require DNA tests or adoption papers. It requires love, and that's something you never had for me. Grandmother knew that. That's why she left everything to the only grandchild who loved her for who she was, not what she could leave behind." As I walked toward the door, the shouting resumed behind me. Catherine threatening lawyers, Jason calculating costs, Emma wailing about unfairness. But there was one voice that stopped me. "Marcella, wait." It was Aunt Janet Mother's youngest sister. She'd been silent throughout the confrontation, but now she stepped forward. I remember Sarah. She was kind and gentle and so excited about becoming a mother. Catherine was her best friend, or so she thought. Sarah would be proud of who you've become despite everything, and ashamed of what we all allowed to happen in her absence. It was the first time in 28 years anyone in that room had acknowledged my real mother as a person who'd lived and loved and lost everything. I nodded to Janet, then walked out the door, leaving the chaos behind. The next weeks were a symphony of harassment and isolation. Catherine had weaponized the family phone tree, and suddenly relatives I hadn't heard from in years were calling with their opinions. Cousins sent Facebook messages about family loyalty. Aunts left voicemails about disappointing grandmother's memory. Uncles sent emails threatening their own legal action. The 46 missed calls that started this had multiplied into hundreds of attempts to break me down. My apartment became a refuge, but even there, the weight of revelation pressed down. Ben came over every evening after his shift bringing takeout and Sophie's drawings. The 8-year-old had made me a picture of a rainbow with stick figures holding hands underneath. "You look sad, Miss Marcy," she'd told Ben. "This will make her happy again." At work, I threw myself into caring for patients, finding solace in the clarity of medical needs versus family manipulation. My colleagues noticed something was wrong. Patricia, the nurse who'd known grandmother, brought me coffee and said simply, "Rose loved you best because you were the only one who loved her back. Don't let them make you doubt that." 2 weeks after the confrontation, Jason showed up at the hospital during my lunch break. He looked tired, his usual polish dulled. He sat across from me in the cafeteria and for once dropped the lawyer act. "I need you to understand something," he started. "I've known since I was 10. Mom told me you weren't her real daughter, said it was why I needed to be perfect to make up for Dad's mistake. She never called you his mistake to your face, but that's what she meant. Every achievement I had was measured against the daughter she never wanted. I studied my brother, this golden child who'd carried his own burden. That doesn't excuse anything, Jason. No, it doesn't. But I want you to know that the success she praised, it was never enough because it wasn't really about me. It was about proving that her children were better than Sarah's child. We were weapons in a war against a dead woman." He slid a folder across the table. "I'm not contesting the will. This is my formal statement declining to participate in any legal action. Emma won't fight without me, and Mom can't afford a legal battle on her own. The inheritance is yours, Marcella. It always should have been." After he left, I sat in the hospital cafeteria crying into cold coffee. Not because of his gesture, but because it had taken 28 years and $1 million inheritance for him to acknowledge what he'd always known was wrong. Emma's visit came next, but hers was less noble. She showed up at my apartment with Richard, who waited in the car like getaway driver. She'd been crying, her perfect makeup running in designer streaks. "Richard's leaving me," she announced. "The house renovation was supposed to be funded by my inheritance." When that fell through, he said I'd misrepresented my financial situation. Fraud, he called it, as if marriage was a business merger gone wrong. I wanted to feel sympathy, but all I could think about was every family dinner where she'd flaunted her wealthy husband, while Mother reminded me that Ben's divorce made him damaged goods. Emma continued, "Mother says you've destroyed the family. She's been telling everyone in her real estate circle that you manipulated grandmother. She's lost 3 clients already because word got around about the security footage." Dad moved into Jason's old room. They're barely speaking. She waited for me to offer comfort or money or both. When neither came, her tears dried up remarkably fast. "You're really going to keep everything, even though it's destroying us?" I thought about all the Christmas mornings when I got practical gifts like socks while Emma opened jewelry. All the family vacations I wasn't invited on because someone needed to stay with grandmother. All the graduation parties, engagement celebrations, and milestones that were never quite important enough when they were mine. The money isn't destroying you, Emma. The truth is. And that's not my burden to carry anymore. She left in a huff, Richard's car peeling out of the parking lot. But the most surprising visit came from Dad a month later. He looked older, grayer, smaller somehow, without Catherine beside him, directing his every move. We sat in silence for a long time before he spoke. "I loved your mother, Sarah. Truly loved her. When she died, part of me died too. Catherine was there strong where I was weak, decisive, where I was lost. She handled the funeral, the baby care, everything. By the time I realized I'd traded my grief for a different kind of prison, you were calling her Mama, and it seemed too late to change anything. He pulled out a small box. This was Sarah's. I should have given it to you years ago, but Catherine said it would only confuse you. I'm sorry, Marcella, for all of it, for choosing the easy path, for letting Catherine erase your mother, for being too much of a coward to stand up for my own daughter. Inside the box was a locket with a picture of Sarah holding me as a newborn. On the back was engraved, "My greatest love, my sweetest gift." I wore it every day after that, a tangible reminder that I had been loved completely, if only for a few moments. The extended family continued their campaign. One uncle suggested I was being selfish. An aunt accused me of elder abuse. Cousins I'd played with as children sent messages about how disappointed they were in my choices. But for every attack, there was something else. Patricia from work mentioned that grandmother had talked about me constantly, worried about me, loved me fiercely. Ben's mother, who'd never met Catherine, said she could see the relief in my posture now that the truth was out. I hired a lawyer to handle the estate transfer, making sure everything was ironclad. The house sale would take time, but the liquid assets were transferred within weeks. For the first time in my life, I had financial security that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Catherine made one last attempt, showing up at the hospital, with papers from a lawyer demanding mediation. Security had to escort her out when she started screaming about theft and ingratitude. The whole scene was captured on the hospital's cameras, adding to her humiliation. The prominent real estate agent exposed as a fraud who tried to steal from her dying mother and had lied to her stepdaughter for nearly 3 decades. The private investigator I hired found Margaret Williams Coleman in Boulder, Colorado within a week. When I called the number he provided, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. A warm voice answered, and when I said my name, there was a sharp intake of breath. Oh my God. Marcella, Sarah's Marcella. We've been looking for you for 28 years. The story that tumbled out from my aunt broke my heart all over again. After Sarah's death, they'd tried to stay involved. They'd sent letters, made phone calls, even drove to Indianapolis when I was 6 months old. Catherine had threatened them with a restraining order, claiming they were harassing her family during a difficult time. Dad, lost in his grief, had gone along with it. They'd hired lawyers, but with no biological claim to me, and Dad's consent to Catherine's demands, they had no recourse. Margaret cried as she told me about Sarah. Your mother was brilliant, Marcella. She was studying to be a pediatric surgeon before she got pregnant. She put her residency on hold, planning to return after you were born. She had your whole life planned out, not in a controlling way, but with such hope. She used to talk to you constantly while she was pregnant, telling you about all the places she'd take you, all the things she'd teach you. 2 days later, I was on a plane to Colorado. Ben had encouraged me to go, taking time off to watch Sophie so I could meet my mother's family without distraction. At the Denver airport, I recognized Margaret immediately. She looked like Sarah, like me, and when she pulled me into a hug, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Margaret's house was warm and lived in, with photos covering every surface. She'd kept all of Sarah's things, waiting for the day she could share them with me. We sat on her couch for hours as she showed me videos of my mother. Sarah laughing at a birthday party. Sarah giving a presentation in medical school. Sarah at her wedding, glowing with happiness as she danced with my father when he was young and unburdened by compromise. David flew in from Oregon the next day. My uncle was quieter than Margaret, but equally emotional. He brought photo albums and letters Sarah had written him about her pregnancy. In one, she'd written, I already love her so much it scares me. How is it possible to love someone you've never met? But I do. I love her fingernails and her hiccups and the way she kicks when I play Mozart. They told me stories Catherine had stolen from me. How Sarah had insisted on natural childbirth because she wanted to be fully present for my arrival. How she'd painted the nursery herself despite Dad's protests, wanting to create something with her own hands for her child. How she'd made Dad promise that if anything happened to her, he'd make sure I knew I was loved. He broke that promise, David said quietly. But we never forgot you, Marcella. We celebrated your birthday every year, wondering who you'd become. Margaret kept a room ready in case you ever found us. We hired 3 different private investigators over the years, but Catherine always blocked us. Margaret showed me the room she'd kept. It was painted soft yellow, just like the nursery Sarah had painted. There were toys appropriate for different ages, bought year after year in hope. Books Sarah had loved, clothes in various sizes, all waiting for a niece who never came. Until now. I spent a week in Colorado, absorbing 28 years of missed family. Margaret's children, my cousins, welcomed me with open arms. Her daughter Lucy, close to my age, said she'd grown up hearing about the cousins stolen by the wicked stepmother. It sounded like a fairy tale, but you were real, and we never stopped hoping you'd find us. They showed me Sarah's medical school records, her dreams of opening a clinic for underprivileged children. When I told them I was a nurse, Margaret smiled through tears. It's in your blood. Sarah would be so proud that you're healing people even if the path was different than hers. On my last night, Margaret gave me a box of letters Sarah had written but never mailed. They were all addressed to my darling daughter and dated throughout her pregnancy. I read them on the plane home, sobbing openly as my mother's voice reached across 28 years of silence. My darling daughter, today you kicked so hard, I gasped in the middle of a grocery store. An old woman smiled and said you must be eager to join the world. I told her you already had, that you'd changed everything just by existing. I hope you always know that you are wanted, planned for, cherished beyond measure. I hope you never doubt that you were born from love, not obligation or accident or compromise, but from the deepest love 2 people could share. When I got home, Ben was waiting with Sophie and dinner. As I showed them photos of my newfound family, Sophie asked a simple question that cut straight to the heart of everything. Miss Marcy, why did your other mommy lie about your real mommy? I thought about how to explain betrayal and jealousy and decades of deception to an 8-year-old. Finally, I said, sometimes people hurt others because they're hurting inside. But that doesn't make it okay. That's why we always choose kindness and truth, even when it's harder. That night after Sophie was asleep, Ben held me while I processed everything. Margaret had invited us all for Thanksgiving. David wanted to fly out for my birthday. I had a family that actually wanted me, not despite who I was, but because of who I was. The settlement from grandmother's estate was finalized the next month. I kept the house, unable to sell the one place where I'd felt truly loved growing up. The rest I invested carefully, setting aside funds for Sophie's college and for the future Ben and I were building together. I also started a scholarship fund at the nursing school in Sarah Williams, Thompson's name for students who understood that healing was about more than medicine. Catherine continued her campaign of victimhood, but her reputation was destroyed. The real estate community in Indianapolis was small, and word traveled fast about the woman who tried to con her dying mother and had lied to her stepdaughter for decades. Jason told me she'd had to close her business and take a job with a national chain where no one knew her story. Emma's divorce was finalized quickly. Without the promised inheritance, Richard had no reason to stay. She moved back in with our parents, the 3 of them living in that house of lies and resentment they'd built together. Sometimes I felt sorry for them, but then I remembered 28 years of being treated like an unwanted guest at my own family's table. Dad sent letters I didn't open at first. When I finally did, they were full of regret and memory. He wrote about Sarah's laugh, her determination, her joy when they found out she was pregnant. He wrote about his cowardice, his weakness, his failure as a father. He never asked for forgiveness, just witnessed to his own failures. I kept the letters, but didn't respond. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. 6 months after that voicemail changed my life, I stood in grandmother's renovated kitchen making Thanksgiving dinner. The house had been transformed from a museum of secrets into a home of truth. Ben and Sophie had moved in the month before, filling the rooms with laughter and life that had been missing for so long. Margaret and David arrived early, arms full of family recipes and stories about Sarah's cooking disasters. Lucy brought her husband and twin boys, who immediately adopted Sophie as their leader in chaos. Other cousins came people I'd never known existed, but who welcomed me like I'd always been part of their world. Patricia from work came with her family, as did other colleagues who'd become my chosen family. Ben's parents drove up from Kentucky, his mother teaching me her secret stuffing recipe, while his father fixed the loose cabinet grandmother had always meant to repair. The house was full of people who knew my whole story and loved me not despite it, but because surviving it had shaped who I was. As we sat around the dining table, I thought about that voicemail 6 months ago. Don't come back home. At the time, it had felt like the ultimate rejection, the final proof that I'd never belonged. But standing in my grandmother's house surrounded by people who actually loved me, I realized it had been a gift. That voicemail had freed me from 28 years of pretending. Those 46 missed calls from family who only cared about money had shown me the difference between blood relations and real family. Catherine's cruelty had actually been my liberation. Sophie stood up to share what she was thankful for, as was our new tradition. I'm thankful for Miss Marcy becoming my real mommy soon, she announced, spoiling Ben's planned proposal for later that evening. Everyone laughed as Ben shrugged and got down on one knee right there between the turkey and green beans. Marcella, he said, holding out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, not expensive, but real. You've taught me that family isn't about perfection or pretense. It's about choosing each other every day, especially on the hard days. Will you marry me? Through tears, I said yes, and the house erupted in celebration. Margaret hugged me tight, whispering that Sarah would have loved this moment. David took photos while Lucy's boys cheered, and Sophie danced around us singing about weddings and cake. Later that evening, as people settled into comfortable conversation, I stepped out to the back porch. The garden where grandmother and I had planted tomatoes was dormant for winter, but come spring it would bloom again. I touched the locket with Sarah's picture, thinking about the journey from that horrible voicemail to this moment of joy. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Emma. I saw the announcement on Sophie's Instagram. Congratulations. Mom is furious. Dad is drinking. Jason moved to London for work. We're all miserable. Hope you're happy. I deleted the message without responding. Their misery was no longer my responsibility. They'd chosen their path when they chose lies over truth, money over me, maintaining appearances over genuine relationship. Every cruel comment, every forgotten birthday, every family photo I wasn't in had led to this moment where I had everything, and they had only each other. Ben found me on the porch, wrapping his arms around me from behind. You okay? I'm more than okay. I'm free. He understood what I meant. Free from seeking approval that would never come. Free from accepting crumbs and calling them love. Free from the weight of Catherine's resentment and Dad's cowardice. Free from pretending that DNA meant more than actual care and kindness. Inside, Sophie was showing Margaret the drawings she'd made of our wedding. There would be flowers and cake and dancing according to the 8-year-old wedding planner. But most importantly, there would be family, real family. The kind that chose you and kept choosing you not because they had to, but because they wanted to. A year later, we were married in grandmother's backyard. Margaret walked me down the aisle since Dad hadn't been invited. Sarah's medical school friends came sharing stories about my mother's kindness and brilliance. Jason sent a card with a check we donated to charity. Nothing from Catherine or Emma, which was its own kind of gift. During the reception, Margaret gave a toast that brought everyone to tears. Sarah always said that love multiplies when divided. She believed that family was about expansion, not exclusion. Today, watching her daughter marry a man who sees her true worth, surrounded by people who love her for exactly who she is, I know Sarah's spirit is here, not as a ghost haunting what was stolen, but as a presence celebrating what was found. The house became a haven for others dealing with family trauma. We hosted support groups in the living room where Catherine had once held court. The dining table that had been the site of so many uncomfortable Sunday dinners now welcomed chosen families who understood that blood didn't guarantee love. Sophie started calling me Mom without the Miss Marcy prefix. We legally formalized the adoption on the 2-year anniversary of grandmother's death, using the same courthouse where Catherine had once threatened Margaret with a restraining order. The symmetry felt like justice. Ben and I had our own daughter 2 years after that. We named her Rose Sarah for the grandmother who saw the truth and the mother who never got the chance. When she was born, Margaret was there, David too, the family Sarah would have wanted surrounding her granddaughter. The nurse who handed her to me said she had my eyes, and I thought about how Sarah had never gotten to hear those words about me. As I write this, it's been 5 years since that voicemail. Catherine still lives in Indianapolis alone now, since Dad finally left, and Emma moved to California to start over. Jason sends Christmas cards from London with generic messages and no return address. They're strangers now, people who share some DNA but nothing else with me. Sometimes people ask if I forgive them. The truth is, forgiveness isn't the right word. I understand them, their motivations, their fears, their choices. Catherine was a woman so consumed by jealousy that she punished a baby for her mother's crime of being loved first. Dad was a man so broken by grief that he chose numbness over his daughter's well-being. Jason and Emma were children raised in dysfunction, who chose self-preservation over truth. Understanding isn't forgiveness, and it isn't forgetting. It's simply accepting that some people are incapable of love that isn't transactional. Catherine loved what she could control. Dad loved what was easy. Jason and Emma loved what benefited them. None of them knew how to love a little girl who looked like a ghost they couldn't exorcise. But that little girl found her own way to love and be loved. She became a nurse who holds dying patients' hands so they don't feel alone. She became a mother who tells Sophie and Rose every day that they are wanted, planned for, cherished beyond measure. She became a wife who understands that partnership means choosing each other, especially when it's hard. She became a woman who knows that family is about showing up, not showing off. That voicemail saying, "Don't come back home," was the beginning of finding where I actually belonged. Those 46 missed calls from people who abandoned me were just the sound of a door closing on a room where I'd never been welcome anyway. Catherine thought she was punishing me by revealing her true feelings, but she actually freed me to find my true family. Grandmother knew what she was doing when she left me everything. Not just the money and the house, but the truth. She knew that fortune without honesty would have been another cage that I needed to know why I'd always felt like a stranger in my own family. Her final gift wasn't just financial security, but emotional freedom. Every morning I wake up in the house where grandmother loved me next to a husband who chooses me with daughters who will never doubt they belong. The walls that once held secrets now hold laughter. The table that witnessed so much judgment now hosts joy. The garden where grandmother and I planted hope now blooms with possibility. To anyone watching who recognizes their own story and mine, who knows the weight of family rejection, who understands the exhaustion of trying to earn love that should be freely given, know this. Sometimes the family that hurts you is just clearing space for the family that will heal you. Sometimes rejection is protection. Sometimes a voicemail telling you not to come back is actually the universe saying you're free to move forward. That message from my mother wasn't a rejection. It was a revelation. Those 46 missed calls weren't from family. They were from strangers who happened to share some DNA. The real family, the one Sarah would have wanted for me, was waiting. I just had to be brave enough to stop settling for crumbs and start expecting the feast. Now I know who I really am. Not Catherine's unwanted stepdaughter, or Dad's shameful secret, or my siblings' competition for inheritance. I'm Sarah Williams Thompson's daughter, Rose's beloved granddaughter Margaret, and David's found niece Ben's chosen partner Sophie, and Rose's devoted mother. I'm exactly who I was always meant to be, just with a different family than the one I was born into. And that truth, that beautiful, liberating, life-changing truth, is worth more than any inheritance could ever be. Looking back, I realize grandmother orchestrated all of this. She could have told me the truth years ago, but she waited until she knew I was strong enough to handle it, until I had Ben in my life for support, until Catherine's mask had slipped enough that no one could deny her true nature. Even in death, grandmother protected me one last time by ensuring I'd have the resources to build a new life away from the people who'd spent 28 years showing me I didn't belong with them. The voicemail is still saved on my phone. Sometimes I play it to remind myself how far I've come. 4 words that changed everything. Don't come back home. Catherine meant it as a threat, as a final act of cruelty from a woman who'd spent nearly 3 decades punishing me for existing. But I hear it differently now. I hear it as permission to stop trying to earn a place at a table where there was never a chair for me. I hear it as freedom from the exhausting performance of pretending we were a family when we were really just strangers acting out roles that never quite fit. Have you ever been rejected by family? Have you ever discovered that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had conditions you could never meet? If you have, I want you to know that their inability to love you says nothing about your worthiness of love. It only reveals the limitations of their own hearts. Please share your own stories in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who understand that chosen family is just as real, just as valid, and often more genuine than the family we're born into. Like this video, if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of triumph over family trauma, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that they're not alone in their journey from rejection to redemption. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the courage to walk away from tables where you're not celebrated toward rooms where you're not just welcomed, but wanted. May you discover, as I did, that sometimes the greatest gift a toxic family can give you is the freedom to find your real family elsewhere. Remember, you are worthy of love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself, hide yourself, or hate yourself. You deserve a family that celebrates your victories, comforts your losses, and stands by you not because they have to, but because they can't imagine their lives without you. That's the family I have now, 5 years after a voicemail tried to break me, but instead built me into someone who knows her worth. And if I could find that after 28 years of being unwanted, you can find it too. The journey from rejection to acceptance doesn't always lead back to where you started. Sometimes it leads forward to where you were always meant to be. With love and hope for your own journey, this is Marcella signing off.